Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Tragedy Looper, New Tragedies from WizKids. Tragedy Looper New Tragedies is the newest version in the Tragedy Looper series of games. This is an older series of games that WizKids is reprinting. This is a 2 to 4 player deduction game which one player, the Mastermind, is going to be working against the other players. In the game, there basically are tragedies, as the name implies. You have these tragedies that are occurring, and you are all players who have the opportunity to travel through time, or the other players, 3 of the players at the table, have the opportunity to travel through time and to prevent tragedies, except, unfortunately, one time they find themselves in a bit of a loop. The tragedy they try to stop keeps happening no matter what happens. It's at that point that they realize that there's some other shadowy force in play, the Mastermind, who is also traveling through time and trying to ensure that the tragedies continue to occur. That's the name, the Tragedy Looper. You're going through sequences of time which something bad will happen, the players will lose, they will reapproach the game with some degree of possible knowledge of things that are going on, and then they'll try again, and they might lose again. They have a certain number of loops that will depending on the specific script that you are playing. You will have a variable number of loops to go through, opportunities, until eventually, if you lose too many times, you die. You cannot prevent, well, you don't die, you lose. You cannot prevent the tragedy that is occurring, often, unfortunately, involving someone else die. So, that's the basic idea of the game. That's the theme. Something is happening, something is playing out, the Mastermind is trying to ensure that it happens, and the other players, the protagonists, are trying to stop it from happening. To that end, the Mastermind has more knowledge as to what the actual situation is. The game has a bunch of scripts, but there's a bunch of pre-generated scripts you can play through, as well as the fact that the game gives you opportunities and ways to create your own scripts as you play as well. But the general idea is you have a sequence of things that are trying to happen, often involving these characters in various locations on the board. You're going to have the 4 locations, the hospital, the shrine, the school, and the city, and the characters are going to start in different areas and also have the opportunity to move to different areas, although some characters can't really move at all, like this patient who must stay in the hospital in the course of the game. You can see that in the little top pattern. Additionally, players have various abilities, different things they can do to mess with the game state in different ways, to give players more information or to get in the way as the game moves on. But past that, there's something that's trying to happen. There's a sequence of events that results in the Mastermind winning and the protagonist losing, and that sequence of events could be a variety of things depending on the various scripts you have in play. You're going to have 2 different sheets over here, the first steps as well as the advanced steps, the basic tragedy set over here, and these represent different amounts of information of things that could be going on. And so, for example, in this game, I'll warn you, because before we dive into the review part, aspects of this game, the core concept of the game is easy to understand. The way the game actually plays out is a little harder, which is also one of the critiques I'll have, but that means I'll try to teach it as much as possible, but hopefully we'll figure it out. But the basic idea is at some point in the game, let's just play this out. You're playing through the first game, something happens, and at some point in the game, someone dies. And the Mastermind turns to the players and says, "You lost." That is information that will be passed on to the players, but now the players sit there and they go through, well, if someone died and we lost, we know that something about that situation led to our death. It could be that the person in play is a key person. That could be a situation. Or maybe it was the end of a loop, and there's also 2 intrigue over here on the school. Depending on the situation, there could be multiple factors in play that contribute to how the players lost. But the thing is, knowing that information gives them more information. Knowing that they lost gives them the information already that they need. They can now look at the game state and try to figure out, well, if this is the current game state and we lost, then currently we now have a few pieces of information. We know that it could be one of these few reasons we lost, and if it's one of those few reasons, we know that these players are likely in play, and those main plots and subplots are likely in play. It gives the players information as they lose, and so they dive into it again. At the end of the first round, someone dies, perhaps. Maybe you have a character who just dies in a location, at which point you know that you have the serial killer in play. Because a serial killer, if they're alone with another player, will go ahead and kill that player. And so now you know that over here we have the serial killer in play. Because things will happen across the course of the game, as soon as those things happen, the Mastermind is controlling what can happen to a degree, but the Mastermind is also victim to some of the circumstances at times. Events will trigger, people will die, the state of the game will constantly be changing, sometimes with the control of the Mastermind, sometimes by the very nature of the mandatory sequence of events, and the protagonists are always trying to read into those actions to find out more information and to piece together the puzzle. It's effectively a logic puzzle. The whole game comes down to a logic puzzle where you're trying to deduce what is happening based on the things that are happening, and then eventually you die, you lose, and you have to jump into the next loop. That's where you're tracking time over here with the number of loops that you have, slowly counting down across the course of the loops you have to see if you can stop the thing from happening. Maybe at the end of loop 2 you die, you lose again, but this time nobody died, and so now you know it's because there's intrigue at the school, so you've narrowed it down a bit, and that can give you a bit more information. So now you spend your effort and energy trying to prevent the buildup of intrigue at the school, which brings us to the actual gameplay cycle. This is all the higher level idea of what's going on and what you're trying to do. To that end, the gameplay cycle essentially involves the players and the mastermind being handed their respective script cards over here. You're going to have the scripts that they have, each giving them degrees of information, the mastermind getting more information because they know what's going on, and the players, the protagonists, getting less information, but still the same puzzle, just with more pieces of that puzzle put together. From there, the players are going to take their turns playing cards. The mastermind is going to be playing 3 cards onto players and locations, playing them face down. The players don't know what's happening, and the players have the opportunity to play cards from their hand, again, onto players and locations, often based on seeing what the mastermind did, and so being able to make judgment calls based around that. When all the cards have been played, you'll flip things over, at which point you'll start to mess with what's happening. Maybe you're adding unease to the characters. Maybe you're adding intrigue to locations. Maybe you're moving people around the board. All those things are going to be happening. Or maybe you're preventing movement. The players have different cards and different abilities as far as how they can mess with the game state, but they have some degree of influence over the actions. You're traveling through time and you bump into somebody and you tell them they should probably head over to the hospital for some reason, and they listen to you. Except the problem is they also run into the mastermind along the way, and he pushes them to go back home to their grandmother. There's all these situations thematically as far as what's happening, but you are influencing the lives of these characters just by existing in their world, and through that influence you're influencing the sequence of actions that will occur, and hopefully as the protagonists stopping the tragedy from occurring, and as the mastermind trying to make sure that it does. You'll repeat the cycle across the variable number of loops, playing cards to mess with things, having the mastermind go through, and all this is printed nice on the board. You're going to have the start of day effects, which could be some effects. You'll play the cards, the mastermind playing any of their cards, the protagonist playing their cards, and then resolving the cards. Then the mastermind will execute any optional abilities. Some abilities are mandatory. That serial killer, if they're alone, they will kill someone. The mastermind may not even like that. It may play their hand too early before they're ready for things. They may not like it, but they have to do it. But then optional abilities the mastermind can go ahead and engage with. We'll have any incidents. Incidents are going to be a set of things that are in the first steps and the basic tragedy, various things that can occur at a certain point in time along this track that the players and the mastermind know will occur, but the mastermind has more knowledge as to why or how or which character it will occur with. And then you get to day end where you change the leader, and that's going to be a day. Each loop is comprised of a set number of days. We'll go through that sequence multiple times. At the end of the sequence of days, at the end of any one of those sequences of days, meaning at the end of the full sequence, at the end of a full loop, if the tragedy that's supposed to occur has not occurred, the players win and the mastermind loses. Through sheer passivity, the players can win if the mastermind is inefficient enough in their play, but generally the mastermind can make things happen because they know what's supposed to happen and the players don't yet. This is a game of deduction. The players have to figure out what's going on, the protagonists have to figure out what is happening, and then from there, once they do figure out what's happening, it's a bit of a dance to get in the mastermind's way, and at times you can get in their way without even knowing the full answer to everything, if you even just are able to figure out enough to realize that you're preventing and stemming the mastermind's plans, you can still stop them from winning the game. That is basically Tragedy Looper. I hope you understood basically what's going on here. This is a hard game to teach because so much of it is dependent on the fact that every situation is different. Every tragedy has a different script, a different set of what's going on, and that all influences how you actually absorb what's going on. It can take a game or two to get this one under your belt as far as understanding what's going on in the system. But with that, let's go ahead and dive into my review, starting off with ease of play, and ease of play is not good. It's not good in this game. Now, to be very clear, the game has 2 rulebooks. It has one covering like the actual how to play, and then it has one covering the actual Mastermind's handbook with the various scripts around, how to engage in the various scripts as you're going through it. And the information is all present, and it's easy to absorb. The problem is the game is teaching you something fairly complex to mentally envision, all while doing so without a firm construct in play, because the construct isn't there yet until you have the script to have the construct around. This game has to teach you the kind of way it works and then give you the actual pathway that you're trying to apply that all towards, and you're doing that in a system which the players can't properly communicate to each other everything that's going on, which lends itself to very messy first plays. I dove into the original game way back in the day and eventually got rid of it because it was a game that was hard to teach new players, and I dove back and tried to loop for new tragedies, and it does have the same problem. It is a game that is wonderfully entertaining and rewarding. We're diving into the review part, but this all goes under ease of play. This is a game that's wonderfully entertaining and rewarding if you can play it with people who know what's going on. But it is messy to teach new players, and it can be a frustrating experience, and it's the kind of thing that I wouldn't recommend diving into unless you're prepared to give it multiple plays, because the concept is sound and the tactical depth is there, but it's very hard to initially fully gather what's going on. You're going to be playing cards adding intrigue or unease or moving people with very little understanding as to what you're even supposed to be trying to do, just having a vague, hey, I'm doing things here, until eventually you start to see the pattern and eventually start to get in the way. The ease of play is not great. But with that, diving into the review, what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, although you have a hint as to what I don't like over there. Starting off with what I like, which is the unique theme. This is a game that has you going back in time in a loop. If you ever watched movies where you have to go back in time, prevent the thing, Groundhog's Day, so to speak, you get to live that in this game, which is a lot of fun. Trying to move characters around the board in different ways, trying to understand that clearly the Mastermind has been trying to move the police officer to the top corner, and so stopping them either by adjusting their movement or canceling the movement or moving somebody else out of the corner because maybe they don't want to be in the shrine, maybe they just want to be with the prophet, and so you're trying to manage all of that in the game. This is a game that has that ability to repeat time, and it gives you that aspect of, you know, we lost, reset, let's try it again, we lost, reset, try it again. It has that thematic appeal that no other game truly has given me in terms of the feeling of time actually being a concept that I really value. The you lost, reset, start again. It's a unique theme and it's well implemented, and it gives you incredible deduction at the same time. The deduction in this game is very present. You have this whole giant sheet full of information, and at first it's overwhelming, but as you start to see things happen, you can start to make judgment calls as to what's going on. Which characters are they? The henchman's really, you know, the cultist, and the patient is the old curmudgeon. You're gonna have different pieces of information as far as the roles that characters play in the behind the scenes aspect of the secret role that they have assigned to them, and you're trying to deduce all of that. But seeing things happen gives you knowledge. If you end the round in this game state right now, and no one dies, then you inherently know that there's no serial killer in play. So trying to set up those situations so that you have the information, and if you know there's no serial killer in play, you might also know that it's not one of the particular scenarios in play as well. Setting up information that you're trying to feed off of will give you information as to what's going on, and so it's a deduction game combined with a time loop, and the whole redo concept just works brilliantly well within the execution of what this game is doing. Which brings me to things I don't like, which is twofold. The first I touched upon already. This game is hard to get people up and running with. The barrier to entry is very much there. This is a game that works best with people who have played the game, who understand the system, and are willing to engage in repeat plays of the same system, working off of each other. It is not a rewarding first play. It is barely a rewarding second play. It really takes multiple plays, playing on both sides and understanding the way both sides operate for you to get the most out of the system, which just gives it a lot of barrier to entry in terms of how much fun this game can start off being initially. And the second complaint I have is one that is a pro and a con. For me, it's a negative, but it might be a positive for you. The fact that solving the puzzle doesn't mean you stop the tragedy. I can perfectly deduce everything that's going on as far as the roles, the characters, all the stuff, and just understand what's happening in the game. I can do that. But then ultimately, if you can outplay me on the card play, you might still win. I know that you're trying to get the police officer down to the prophet in order to make sure the two of them are alone and to kill them in the shrine. I can understand all that. But if you outplay me on the cards and you maneuver characters differently, so congratulations, I've deduced the game, but you've still tactically outplayed me, and possibly in a game of 50-50. If I played this card, I would have won. If you played that card, you would have won. And so the game can sometimes come down to just what the cards are played out in times where you still are trying to read into the mind of your opponents, but it does change the system a bit, which for me is a bit of a negative. I like the deduction aspect of this game. I like figuring out what goes on. Now, it's worth noting, there is a thing when you get to the end of the final loop that you could make a perfect prediction as far as everything that's going on, but you have to get all the rolls right. You don't necessarily... I would say that you can figure out the things you need to stop the crime, but also not figure out everything, and so it's still only a halfway point as far as my criticism over there. Now, the flip side of that is you might like that. You might like the fact that this is not just a deduction game, but a deduction combined with getting in the other person's way. It might be a pro for you. For me, it's the only other con in addition to the difficulty to teaching new players. As far as I can see others not liking, learning it is a big factor. I covered this already. This is going to be something that might be a hard first few plays, and that just might make it a game that's not for you. If you're not prepared to invest into it, I would. If you're not prepared to give this game like 3 plays, I wouldn't recommend giving it even the first play. Except maybe at a convention or something. Maybe it'll work for you. I don't know. But I wouldn't recommend trying this game unless you were prepared to give it some degree of time to commit to it. And then secondly, well, 2 other things. First of all is replayability. Replayability in general is going to be a factor here. There is the ability to create your own scripts, but if you're not going to, then you'll have I don't know, I think you have 13 scripts in the base game. I'm sure there'll be more expansions. This game was heavily expanded upon, and you could create your own scripts, and I'm sure others will create their own scripts, but if you're not going to dive into that stuff, then there's 13 scripts in the base game, which should still be a decent amount of plays, even factoring for those first 3 plays just being a learning the game and learning the system kind of system. And then lastly, this game definitely deserves a content warning. There's a lot of death and murdering and serial killers and all that kind of situation, suicides. There's definitely content warning as far as this game. This game is about tragedies. Now, in theory, one player is trying to stop those tragedies, but the other player is trying to enforce those tragedies. Understand the content warning on this game as far as very heavy, dark, adult, tragedy-themed things going on in the system, which might just make it a game that's not for you. As far as final thoughts on Tragedy Looper, ultimately I'm a little bit torn on this one. I think the game itself is brilliant. I think the deduction is amazing. I think the overall system is incredibly unique and incredibly well done. And I also think that it's hard to table, which just has me less excited to pull this out unless I'm pulling it out with people who know what's going on in the system. I don't love teaching this to new players. I don't love playing it with new players. I only enjoy playing with people who know how to play, so I don't have to go through, so I don't have to waste my entire game just kind of getting you to have a halfway fun experience as we go through it. It's a game that I played the original and liked it, and I dove into the new one and also liked it, but again, with the caveat that it's an experience that really needs people that both know what's going on for it to be fully enjoyed by all the players at the table, which does take away from the experience for me. For me, it's a 3.5 out of 5. A great game with a barrier to entry that just is hard to ignore. If you're looking for other game recommendations, first of all, Time Stories. That would be the only other game I know that really heavily dives into time loops in a very different system. I prefer Tragedy Loopers, time loops myself, but Time Stories is easier to dive into and has less of a barrier to entry in that sense. And then secondly, if you're just looking for a head-to-head deduction game of outmoving your opponents, trying to tactically outmaneuver them, think through what they're going to do, and just play against them, Mind Management to me is one of the best games that has that. I know what I have to do to stop you, and I have to kind of read into what you're trying to do, but still ultimately a mind game between the players. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.